All right, friends, a court just ruled it doesn't matter who gave your customer the wrong answer or what it gave them. If your business put it in front of them, you own the consequences, even if what said it was a chatbot. Now, it's not a hypothetical, it's not a made up story. It already happened. A company's chatbot told a customer something that essentially turned out to be false. And in essence, it did what AI does all the time. You might know it, you might have seen it and experienced it. It does what's called hallucinations. The chatbot hallucinated. The customer believed it, the customer acted on it, and the customer lost money. And when the company got dragged into court over the chatbot's hallucination, and they tried to argue, Your Honor, it was just the bot talking, it wasn't us, the judge essentially said, pound sand, because putting a machine between yourself and the customer does not get you off the hook. And here's why that little case matters more than every AI demo that you've been shown or every dashboard and every half-cocked software program from AI that you've been shown this year. Everybody's obsessed with whether AI can do their job. We've been listening to it now for the last 2 years. Appraisers, my industry, they're freaking out about all the data that's being culled from appraisal reports, and the AI companies themselves, the CEOs of these frontier models, are telling us all that we're going to be obsolete in just a few short years. Personally, I think it's kind of stupid PR if you ask me, but what do I know? I'm just a stupid appraiser. But almost nobody's asking the better question. What happens when the AI does your job, but it gets it wrong? Now, it was inevitable at some point in the journey, this whole AI journey, and we're starting to get an answer. And here's a little preview. It ain't the AI company that's responsible. It ain't the AI chatbot. It's whoever signed their name to that work. They take responsibility. Now, by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly why that matters if you're using AI anywhere in your business right now and what you need to change about it starting, I essentially say, this week, if not today. Now, if you're new here, I'm Blaine, appraisal company owner, investor, martial artist, former Zen monk, and I help appraisers and entrepreneurs build businesses that serve their life instead of the other way around. And of course, I appreciate you being here. Yeah, the story we're talking about happened to Air Canada. It's the Air Canada case. It's probably the cleanest place to start because in November of 2022, a man named Jake Moffatt needed to travel after his dear grandmother passed away. So what did he do? He calls up Air Canada and he says, hey, do you have any bereavement fares? And Air Canada says, sorry, we can't do anything about it. So what does he do? He goes to the website, Air Canada's website, and on there's a chatbot. And he asks the chatbot about what are called bereavement fares. The chatbot told him something different. The chatbot told him he could purchase the ticket, complete his travel first, and then afterwards, once he settled everything, apply for the bereavement discount afterwards. So that's exactly what he did. The problem is that the information was wrong. Air Canada's actual policy said that the bereavement rate could not be requested retroactively after travel had already taken place. And Moffatt bought the ticket based on what the chatbot told him. So he traveled, he applied for the discount afterward, and Air Canada denied it. Now, eventually, the dispute ended up before the British Columbia Civil Resolution Tribunal, essentially a form of court. And this is where the story becomes a little more interesting than just a customer screw up, because Air Canada tried to argue, in effect, that the chatbot was responsible for its own information and that the company shouldn't be responsible for everything that the chatbot said. They essentially said the chatbot was its own entity. Now, again, if you ask me, we've seen airlines do stupid stuff all the time. We see videos where people get beat up, they get dragged out of their chair, they get dragged off the plane because they don't want to get rid of their seat or take another flight or whatever, and airlines end up paying tens of millions of dollars. It's a simple bereavement fare. You would think that Air Canada would have said, what's it going to cost us? $500-600? Instead, they took it to court and tried to argue. Now, of course, the courts rejected the argument. The basic reasoning was pretty straightforward. And of course it would be. It's Air Canada's website. Air Canada chose to put the chatbot on there. Customers have every reason to believe that information provided through that website represents who? They represent Air Canada. So Air Canada is, of course, responsible for the information that the chatbot puts out. Now, I want to be clear here because I don't want to exaggerate this case at all, and we'll talk about a couple other cases after this. The court record doesn't establish that this chatbot was necessarily an AI chatbot in the same sense that, say, ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini are AI chatbots, but that isn't the important part of the story, because the important part is the accountability principle, and it matters to everyone watching and listening in the age that we're living in because of how many you and myself are using AI. Again, including me and all of my companies. You can automate the communication Almost everybody does. If you're not using AI, I recommend you do. I'm not anti-AI. I'm not an AI doom and gloomer. I'm an AI realist. And what we're talking about here is responsibility. Who is going to take responsibility when the chatbot or the AI messes up? You can outsource part of the work to the software. You can put a machine between yourself and the customer. What you apparently cannot do is then pretend that the machine becomes some independent entity that owns the consequences when the information is wrong. And Air Canada is what I would call in this case the minor example, because the story gets much more interesting when we get into one of the big four international accounting and consulting firms, Deloitte. Because sometime just last year in 2025, the Australian government hired Deloitte to perform an independent assurance review of a government welfare system. You may have read about or heard about this case. It was a pretty serious gig for Deloitte, and the government was paying roughly 300,000 US dollars, 440,000 Australian dollars for this study, this consulting scenario by Deloitte. And Deloitte produced a report that ran more than, get this, 200 pages. That's a lot of work. Well, as the internet is famous for doing, a researcher at the University of Sydney in Australia started checking the citations in this report, and they found a few not so minor issues. Some references in that consulting engagement apparently pointed to academic work that simply didn't exist. It was made up out of whole cloth by Deloitte. As they dug further, they found other citations that were incorrect. There was even a fabricated quotation attributed to an Australian federal court judgment. The AI literally made up a fake quote from a fake court administrator from a fake federal court judgment, all out of whole cloth. It didn't exist. It just pulled it completely out of its little digital AI rectum. Now, Deloitte did the only thing they could do. They didn't try to go to court over it. They didn't try to blame it on the AI chatbot. They did the correct thing. They refunded some of the fee for the essentially fake work. And this is where the story changes from AI sometimes gets it wrong or AI sometimes hallucinates into something much bigger and something that applies to every one of us using AI in our work. The Australian government wasn't paying hundreds of thousands of dollars because Deloitte knew how to use Microsoft Word. They weren't paying Deloitte because Deloitte had access to GPT 4.0 or Claude Sonnet. No, the government could get access to essentially the same underlying AI technology all by itself. They didn't need to pay Deloitte. No, what they were buying was Deloitte's judgment, its research, its people, its expertise, its credibility, its massive teams of researchers, and its 175 plus year history and reputation, which it just screwed up, by the way, by doing this, and presumably some level of assurance that the information in the report, remember, a $300,000 report and letter of engagement, had actually been, that the work had been checked and double checked. Again, if you're paying 300,000 US dollars for something, wouldn't you think that to be the bare minimum, that somebody's going to check the work and make sure it's real? That is the professional product that they were paying for. That's what they were paying for, and it's what your clients and mine pay for us. They pay for our judgment, our research, and our understanding of the scope of work, the task at hand, the nuance that's required, the edge cases, all of that stuff. And they shouldn't have to double check the company's work after they deliver the product, nor should they have to hope that some internet sleuth gets a hold of the paper and starts to dissect it looking for mistakes and hallucinations. But that's exactly what happened. So if a person outside the firm can start checking the citations and discover that some of the underlying research doesn't actually exist, that it was made up out of whole cloth, well, then you and I have to ask a much more uncomfortable question. What exactly was the client paying for? And I imagine at some point in the conversation after the Australian government figured out that some of the citations and information in this report was simply hallucinations and fake, I'm sure somebody said to Deloitte, what the hell were we paying for? And again, Deloitte isn't some tiny consulting shop run by three people out of a co-working space. No, this is one of the largest professional services organizations on the planet. They've got lawyers and compliance people and review processes and researchers, managers, and enormous resources spread around the world. That's why this case matters. The lesson isn't that Deloitte is stupid. They're obviously not. The lesson is that if something like this can make it through a sophisticated organization with layers of review and attorneys and researchers, well, then the average business owner like you and I who thinks, don't worry, I'll just have somebody look over the AI output before it goes out. Well, they should probably be paying attention because Deloitte isn't alone. Another one of the big four accounting and consulting firms, and the biggest competitor of Deloitte, you may have heard of them, they're called KPMG, recently published a report about successful uses of artificial intelligence by major organizations. Let me remind you, this was a report, a published report about successful uses of AI, artificial intelligence, by big corporations, including examples involving banks and other organizations, UBS, the Universal Bank of Switzerland, and the NHS, which is Britain's National Health Service. Except both organizations that were written about, UBS and the NHS, British National Health Service, they pushed back. And they said the descriptions weren't accurate. So KPMG eventually pulled the report and opened an internal investigation. There's something completely absurd and ironic about this story. A major consulting company publishes a report about companies successfully using AI, and the report itself ends up under scrutiny because some of those AI success stories apparently weren't real. That's right, they were completely made up. Friends, you can't write the irony or the story any better. But again, I don't want this episode to become cheap. Look how stupid these companies are. Look how stupid the AI is. Again, I'm not against AI. I'm an AI realist. I think it misses the bigger issue if we do that. The real issue is that we now have extremely powerful systems that can produce really good, professional looking work at incredible speed. They can produce reports that look very authoritative, citations that look legitimate, legal arguments that sound extremely convincing, financial analysis that looks sophisticated, and research that appears perfectly credible. And that's the dangerous part, because the dangerous part is that the output often looks better than its reliability actually is. And that creates a completely different problem for professionals like many of you and I. Now, for years, the AI conversation has centered on its capability. I mean, we're told every couple months a new model is coming out and it completely blows away the other model and the other frontier models that it's competing against. Can it write the report? Can it analyze the data? Can it draft the contract? Can it summarize the case? And increasingly, the answer is yes, it can do it very well. It can do all of those things and more. But professional work has another component that doesn't show up in the demonstrations and the dashboards. Somebody has to stand behind the output. Somebody has to be responsible. Someone has to put their signature on the answers that the AI comes up with. The AI, I'll remind you, is not a human. Now, let's bring this all the way home, because if you're an appraiser like I am, or a service professional of some sort, a student, or somebody in business who uses AI in their work, and I encourage you to do this, and you're watching this thinking, well, interesting story, Blaine, glad that's not my problem. I need you to hold that thought, because it is exactly your problem. Maybe more than anyone else watching. Think about what you actually do with AI right now. Maybe as an appraiser, like I am, it's drafting your market conditions comments. Maybe it's writing your addenda language. Maybe it's helping you research a neighborhood you're less familiar with. You plug your comps into it and you have it describe it, summarizing that sales data, or even just cleaning up your report narrative so it reads better. And it's really good at it. We do this all the time. Maybe you're an attorney. Maybe you use it to review contracts and write up legal documents and briefs. Every one of those Air Canada's chatbots, every one of those Deloitte citations, every one of those KPMG's inept reports, because when that report goes out, your signature is on it, not the AI's, not the software companies, yours. In the appraisal industry, USPAP, or standards of professional practice. It doesn't have a clause that says the appraiser is only liable unless and if ChatGPT wrote this report. No, your state board doesn't care that the market narrative was AI generated when a complaint comes in. Your E&O carrier isn't going to defend the AI told me it was fine comment as a legal strategy. And if you think it will, call your carrier this week and actually ask them. Some of them are starting to put AI riders into the E&O insurance. Now, to go a little deeper on this, if your customers and clients learn that you had AI do all of the work for you, just like Deloitte found out, what do you think happens over time to your business, to your name, and to your reputation? Now, to share a personal story, not too long ago, we got a reconsideration of value request. In the appraisal industry, that's where somebody doesn't agree with your opinion of value or your appraisal, and they say, hey, we want to argue this, and usually they have to submit some new facts, some new comparable sales or something. And it was a very straightforward appraisal for refinance purposes. It was in a normal neighborhood, a development. There were really good comps all around. And in the ROV, the reconsideration of value documentation, it was also stated that the borrower was going through a divorce and didn't like the value, thinking it was, of course, too high. There's always somebody on a divorce case where one wants it higher, one wants it lower. But this individual was on the side that was going to have to pay out the other spouse. So he, of course, thought the appraisal was too high and he was going to have to split a higher dollar amount with his soon to be ex. A clear bias case, and I get it. Nevertheless, he put that in his complaint, and we take all such requests, ROVs, very seriously, and we take them without offense. We look at all the arguments, we review all the additional sales, and we look at the whole issue as if we're looking at it for the first time so that our own biases don't overrule legitimate arguments. I mean, we don't want our egos to get the best of us, and we always want to be fair to the client since, after all, we're human. And sometimes we miss things. Now, in this instance, the homeowner had prepared an extremely thorough, probably the best one I've seen, 5-page report, first highlighting all the things he felt we got wrong about the house, secondly, going into extreme detail on 5 additional comparable sales that he thought should have been utilized as comps, we call them, instead of the ones that we used. And as I started to read through some of the first page of the report, I started to see some of the obvious hallmarks of AI writing, and you might know what I'm getting at here. It's not the issue in and of itself, but I saw the dashes. Those are the little dashes that AI, that are kind of artifacts that leave in some of the writing. Nobody uses M dashes. You'd normally put a comma there, but AI started putting M dashes in. And now everybody knows when you read it, oh, AI wrote this. We started to see some weird language and explanations, phrases like the distinction matters, and a couple other things that tipped me off to the fact that this guy had used AI to produce the report. Friends, again, that's not the issue. It's not the issue to use AI. We use it all the time to write things. But it told me that I should dig into this deeper, kind of like Deloitte did. Now, or the Australian government with the Deloitte consultation. And as I started to review the proposed comparable sales from this gentleman in the ROV, I ran into a little roadblock in that I couldn't find any data whatsoever on 2 of the 5 proposed sales from the gentleman. No MLS data, no Zillow data, and no assessing data on these particular addresses. And sometimes, people will submit an address and then you go, well, maybe they transposed a couple numbers. We tried all configurations of the addresses, couldn't find anything. And we found that those 2 sales had been completely fabricated by the AI. The remaining 3 sales did exist, but the explanations and the descriptions of those sales that the AI had created had some pretty glaring issues, like claims of an in-ground pool where there was no in-ground pool, a 3-stall garage where there was only a 2-stall garage, and fake claims about remodeling where the photos showed absolutely no updates had occurred whatsoever. Friends, this was a pretty easy, and I must say embarrassing one to rebut, both for the borrower and for the lender client. Now, we let them down pretty easily since they're a good client, but it highlighted for us just how serious this AI usage conversation has become. The Australian government thought they were paying Deloitte for judgment, not just output. Your client, the lender, the underwriter, the reviewer, they're paying you for the exact same thing. Your clients and customers are paying you for your judgment and your verification. A professional who stands behind the number, essentially. Now, if AI can generate the same report that a client could generate themselves with a free account, the only thing that still makes you valuable is the part that AI can't do, which is to take responsibility for being right, to understand the nuance of the scenarios that you're reviewing. So here's the principle that I want to leave you with. And it comes from something I learned a long time ago before AI existed. In 19th century common law, there's a concept called non-delegable duty, which was essentially referring specifically to the relationship between a master and a servant. It basically ruled that the master is held liable for the actions of their servants. In fact, a specific case precedent established that a person causing something to be done cannot escape the responsibility of ensuring it is performed properly by merely delegating it to a contractor, in this case from the master to the servant. Now, in more modern case law, this happens even in the military, the doctrine is recognized as a principle from something called vicarious liability, which essentially says that as an employer, you have a personal duty to ensure reasonable care is taken, regardless of whether the work is performed by an employee or by an independent contractor. You're the one responsible. And in the military, a commander can delegate almost anything. They often do. Tasks and decisions, entire operations handed down the chain of command to people who are often better positioned to, of course, execute those commands than the commander is. And what a commander can never do, however, is delegate accountability for the outcome. When something goes wrong, it doesn't matter who pulled the trigger or missed the detail 3 levels down. Command responsibility comes back up the chain every time. AI is not your commanding officer. It is not your cosigner. It is a subordinate. It is a tool. Fast, occasionally brilliant, occasionally confidently wrong, but it never once has to answer for what it gets wrong because it can't. It's not human, and it never will be. Only you can. It can never take responsibility for what it gets wrong, as it can never be held responsible for its mistakes. The most you can do is threaten to use Claude if ChatGPT messes up. I mean, if you want to punish all the big AI frontier models, the worst you can do is start to use the cheaper and often faster Chinese models. But none of those actions are going to save your reputation or your bank account should you find yourself on the pointy end of a lawsuit because the AI you used to write the report got something completely wrong. So here's my advice. Here's what I strongly recommend you start doing if you haven't done this already. Go through every place that AI touches something that leaves your office with your name on it. Narrative, comments, addenda, emails to clients and customers, research summaries, anything. And for each one of those things, each one of those areas, ask yourself honestly, does a human, meaning you, read every single word of that thing, that result from the AI before it goes out? Every time, no exceptions. Not skim it, actually read it. The way you'd read a trainee's first few reports or a lawsuit that shows up in your mailbox, because that's exactly the relationship that you're in. AI is essentially your trainee. It's a tool. It's your employee, talented and super fast quite often, but still your responsibility to check its work. If the answer is no for any of those things, friends, that's the gap. That's the work to be done. Fix it this week, not because AI is dangerous, I'm not saying it is, but because the case law is already telling us plainly who answers for it when it's wrong. It was never going to be the chatbot. It's whoever signed their name. That, my friends, is the new game. Play it like you already know the rules, because now you do. And we're gonna see more and more stories like this. AI might be able to do your job, but it can't take the blame for you. And that's the good news, my friends, because the new illiterate of the next decade, I believe, are going to be the people who can't think for themselves, can't write for themselves, can't create their own original content, can't speak for themselves, or provide a genuine human experience for their customers and their clients. Those who continue to outsource an increasing amount of not just the work, but also their judgment to AI are going to end up being the losers in the future, not the winners like we're being sold by all the founders and CEOs of all the AI companies. The more common something becomes, the less valuable it ultimately becomes. The more common it becomes to have AI doing all of your work, the more valuable your human judgment and human experiences become. See you on the next one.